is your second appearance before. Now, when you were last here, it was to reveal a secret you'd kept from your son, 9 years. He then received the news that the man he'd always known as his dad was not his biological father. You testified that the very same thing happened to you with your mother.
For the second time, Mrs. Moore found herself in the courtroom, determined to break a painful cycle that had haunted her family for generations. The last time she stood before the judge, she had revealed a secret buried for nearly 3 decades. The revelation had shattered him, just as it had shattered her when she learned the same truth about her own mother's deception. But today, she was here not for herself, but for another son, Walter Cooper. His marriage was on the verge of collapse.
Please explain to the court why you've returned today.
My son Walter here could have expressed to me about his child. It may not be his. Then Ashley calls me and asks me to try to help her and Kit. So
Walter Cooper had always believed he was the father of his little girl, but something didn't sit right. His wife Ashley had betrayed him once before, and while he tried to forgive, the past refused to stay buried. Pulling into the driveway, he noticed a sleek black car parked outside. Moments later, a stranger stepped out and walked into his home. When Walter entered, that same man was seated comfortably in his living room, looking all too familiar with the space.
Did you begin to have doubts about this beautiful baby being your child?
The first time I had an inclination that something was going on. I got sent home early. There was a power outage. They sent us home. And as I'm pulling into the driveway, I see this black car and this guy walks into the building we live in. Didn't think nothing of it. So I go into the house. The same guy I just seen come out the car is now sitting inside the house.
The tension was immediate. Walter didn't explode. Not yet. Instead, he pulled the man aside for a quiet confrontation, hoping against hope that his worst fears weren't about to be confirmed. But the man's words sliced through him like a blade. He claimed he had no idea Walter still lived there. Ashley had painted a different picture, one where Walter was absent, uninvolved, a father only in name. That moment shattered whatever was left of Walter's trust.
Mrs. Cooper, were you cheating with this man?
Wasn't me and Walter were on the has that at that time, what I did, all the pain that he had inflicted on me all them years, we've been off and on for 9 years.
Ashley didn't deny the affair. In fact, she admitted it freely. She had suffered too, she claimed. In her eyes, her betrayal was not an act of selfishness, but of revenge. She wanted him to feel the pain he had inflicted on her for years. After their confrontation, she packed her bags, withdrew their children from school, and vanished. And in the time that followed, she admitted she had been with someone else. Ashley.
After this incident with the cheating, you say in your mind, okay, we've confronted it, it's out on the table, let's just try to start over. Then she wakes up one day and says what?
This is not working anymore. I'm done, I'm out of here. She withdrew the kids from school and she had made a phone call.
Is this true, Miss Cooper?
Yep, I left.
Ashley insisted the affair had been brief, a mistake that ended before she found out she was pregnant. But Walter wasn't convinced. The man his wife had cheated with wasn't just a shadowy figure from the past. They had sat together, talked, even hung out, completely unaware that they were entangled in the same web of lies.
Okay.
When I actually had a chance to meet him, we would sit down, we'd talk, we'd hang out, things of this stuff.
You and the guy she cheated with?
Me and the guy that she cheated with. We would
sit
down,
talk, and hang out?
We sat down.
I've never heard of such.
I know, but see, this is the thing. I didn't know.
Oh, you didn't know.
Right.
The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. He wasn't just questioning his wife's faithfulness anymore. He was questioning the very foundation of their marriage. A child was involved, and while she swore that Walter was the father, the timing of her indiscretion left big question marks. His wife had been with another man too close to the time of conception, and that fact alone made everything uncertain.
My concern is this. When I look at Armani, I don't see me.
So, Miss Cooper, I see you're very emotional.
When I conceived, I was with Walter. We both went to the doctors and asked them for advice on conception day.
Mrs. Cooper presented evidence that Walter's grandmother was white. She was adamant that the test would prove Mr. Cooper was the father. She felt that this entire ordeal had been unnecessary. From her perspective, there was no need for doubt. Yes, she had made mistakes, but she knew her child's father. To her, this test wasn't about finding the truth, it was about proving everyone else wrong.
His grandmother
evidence
is white, which the gene passes down to his, I want to say grandfather, then his grandfather passes it down.
That's true.
So if you
Right.
get somebody that has white in their genes and then you get me, why can't my daughter be bright skinned?
And it is in fact true.
Walter's mother had seen firsthand the damage that secrets and lies could cause. Ashley resented her presence, accusing her of meddling where she didn't belong. But Mrs. Moore wasn't here to take sides. She was here for the truth. She had seen too many lives fractured by deception and refused to let history repeat itself. If this child wasn't Walter's, they all deserved to know.
All right, everything you're saying is true, but Ashley, I love her dearly, and I love Armani. I want to know from the time she was born that I told Walter he could have a DNA. I want to know too.
A piece of paper should
doesn't-
not determine that.
The tension in the court was heating up. Each person was eager to be heard and state their case. However, there's only one thing that could make things right despite the back-and-forth accusations: the infidelities, the pain, and the betrayals. Beyond the emotional wreckage, there was one undeniable fact. Only a DNA test could provide the answer they were all searching for.
Mr. Cooper, you are not her father.
You know I still love you. This is something you all gonna have to work through. Listen to me, Ashley. Hold your head up. You have children that now you have to stand up and be a real mother. You have a little girl.
Mr. Fox, you say you've never been sure that Miss Tinker's daughter, Miss Hood, is having sex with more than one man at the time her daughter was conceived, for you to fully accept her into your life.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Miss Tinker, you state that Mr. Fox has no right to doubt to sleeping with multiple men.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Fox stood firm in his doubts. For 2 decades, he had refused to accept that Miss Tinker's daughter, Miss Hood, was his biological child. His argument was simple. At the time of conception, Ms. Tinker had been intimate with more than one man, making it impossible for him to fully embrace the girl as his own. But Miss Hood, now a grown woman, had come to court determined to settle the matter once and for all.
I just want him to be responsible for my daughter, stand up and take responsibility for her. And it took this long because he went around circles, played games, hung up on me, never gave me any real answer to why he's denying her.
For 20 years?
Yes, 20
Evasive
years.
For
I've been working with him.
20 years?
I've been trying to get him to understand.
In Ms. Tinker's eyes, there was no doubt. Mr. Fox was the father. She recalled confronting him early in the pregnancy, accompanied by her mother and grandmother, only to be met with resistance. That rejection had set the stage for 2 decades of uncertainty, pushing her to seek another man to fill the fatherly role in Miss Hood's life. Miss Tinker's claims may be good and fine, but Ralph wasn't buying it.
Were you intimate with any other man during the time of conception?
No, not to my knowledge that I can remember. I can remember me being 3 months later.
Not that you can remember or not?
Your Honor, Your Honor,
It's been 20 years, Your Honor.
Your Honor, she had other boyfriends. She was messing around with other people too. She was smashing the homies and everybody else.
One of the strongest arguments against her case was the fact that Miss Hood had been given another man's last name. For 20 long years, Ms. Tinker had insisted that Mr. Fox was the father of her daughter, Miss Hood. Yet, for just as long, he had denied it. He pointed to her past, her involvement with multiple men, as proof that she couldn't be trusted.
Why do you have doubts?
For once, because she named her after somebody else, you know.
That might cause a doubt.
Okay. Well, I can explain that, Your Honor.
And Your
I
Honor,
can explain
and Your
that.
Honor, first we met at a party, drunk. Both of us was drunk under the influence of alcohol.
Yeah.
She used to sneak outside. So why she acting like she
Yeah,
was
because
a
my
church
mama was
girl?
trying.
this and
Yeah,
that.
I was.
She snuck out.
According to Ms. Tinker, societal pressure had played a role in that decision. When another man, Norman, stepped up and showed interest, she allowed him to believe the child might be his. He signed the birth certificate, and Miss Hood knew him as her father for 6 years. But when a paternity test later proved otherwise, the truth was revealed, and the girl was left without a father once again.
Can you really say that you have no idea why this man could doubt that he's a father? He thought he was sterile. Then you name your daughter after the other guy.
Yeah, I did. I named my daughter after
And the other guy signs the birth certificate. Under the law, he's the father.
Exactly.
Yeah, but me and that other
Exactly,
man
Your
took a
Honor.
paternity test.
The courtroom was tense. Miss Hood sat quietly, watching the people who were supposed to protect her argue over her existence like she was a burden, not a daughter. She had spent her entire life caught between versions of the truth, longing for a father who had never claimed her. She had come here today prepared for the worst, If the test proved he wasn't her father, she would leave. But if it proved he was,
She was 3 years old. He seen who she looked like. He knows she don't. He knows the other man. He knows she don't look nothing like him. I told him at that time, me and him had a paternity test for 3. And at that, he was so busy trying to get back with my homie smashing self that didn't matter to him. Only thing mattered was, I guess, what I had in my pants.
Miss Hood herself was caught in the crossfire of a decades-old dispute. She had spent her childhood believing one man was her father. Now she stood before the court, exhausted by the rejection. She didn't just want answers, she wanted closure. Looking at her daughter's tears, Ms. Tinker regretted her actions. She admitted she had acted selfishly and failed to consider the long-term consequences for her child.
Do you believe Mr. Fox is your father?
Yes, I do.
You do? Why do you believe that?
Because I look like my little brothers.
I apologize, because I was very selfish and didn't think about the consequence, the child. I just thought about myself. I didn't want to look bad because he told me he couldn't have kids.
If Mr. Fox wasn't sterile, then why does he keep denying the child? The contradictions are piling up, but Mr. Fox has an excuse. The timeline of conception wasn't clear. He claimed she had been involved with multiple men, including some of his acquaintances. Though she scoffed at the idea, his accusations painted a picture of a woman whose past was not as straightforward as she wanted the court to believe.
Is it you don't instantly acknowledge that there's a strong possibility that you could be this young woman's father?
To be honest, she looked like some mother.
So you're saying she didn't resemble you?
Yes.
And since it was your understanding that she was also sleeping with other men during that time.
Yes.
The argument took another turn when genetics were brought into play. Ms. Tinker was adamant that Miss Hood's features mirrored those of Mr. Fox, claiming the resemblance was undeniable. But he wasn't convinced. He had never seen enough similarities to make him feel certain. He also pointed out that if the child had truly been his, Ms. Tinker would have fought for a DNA test long ago.
She ain't mine, you know, I'm gonna move on with my life if she ain't mine, you know.
And if she is?
If she is, I apologize and I want to be in her life and try to make things better.
The courtroom was silent as the judge addressed Mr. Fox one final time. Did he understand the weight of what was about to be revealed? If the test proved he was the father, it would mean 20 years of missed moments, lost time, and a daughter who had been left searching for an identity. As the judge prepared to open the envelope, everyone braced for the final answer.
Mr. Fox, you are her father.
Like I said a long time ago, and now when you gonna stand up?
Ashley, you say that after years of searching, you finally located the man you believe to be your biological father. You say that after finding Mr. Bullock, he embraced you as his daughter before cruelly rejecting you the same way he did when you were a child. You say you have no doubt he's your biological father and plan to prove it today. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
The courtroom was tense as Ms. Ashley stood across from Mr. Bullock, the man she had spent years searching for. She had been placed in foster care at the age of 2 and later adopted by a single mother who provided a good life. Yet she always felt something was missing, the absence of a father. Now she was here to prove that Mr. Bullock was indeed her biological father, despite his outright denial.
At age 2, I went to foster care, and at age 6, I was adopted by a single woman. She gave me a good life. She gave me a real good life, but we bumped heads a lot because I always knew I was adopted.
Mr. Bullock had been married to Ashley's mother at one point, but he was adamant that he was not her father. Mr. Bullock claimed that Child Protective Services had been given false information about him, preventing him from being reunited with his child. Ashley was skeptical. If he had wanted to find her, why had it been so easy for her to track him down years later?
I've tried several attempts, several times. As a matter of fact, that Saturday she was looking away.
Ma'am, I was
went down.
adopted.
No, she wasn't adopted right away because I was paying child support.
Okay, so
she wasn't
paying
adopted
child
right
support,
away.
you know exactly
now,
where I was
went
at.
to get her, and a certain party told Child Protective.
Their interactions were heated, with years of pain and frustration spilling out in the courtroom. Judge Lake reviewed their Facebook messages, Bullock's effusive greeting, his invitation for Ashley and her children to visit. Bullock now claimed he'd always expressed doubts, but the paper trail told a different story. Ashley recounted how he'd introduced her to co-workers as his daughter before suddenly disowning her.
Well, when I found him, which was on Facebook, I wrote him an email on Facebook and told him, you know who I am, please contact me.
So you submitted that message that you're speaking about to the
right
court.
there on the...
Things became even more complicated when Ashley recalled how, after finally locating Mr. Bullock, he had initially welcomed her with open arms. Their first interactions had been warm, even affectionate. To her, it was everything thing she had ever wanted, a father who finally saw her. But then, just as suddenly, he had pulled away.
You know, I was with your mom, but I don't know. But we can handle
And that's
this.
what I said.
No,
That's exactly what I said.
No, what you said was, hello, daughter, come visit me and my
Right,
wife.
right.
Let me
No, that
take
was
you
afterwards,
and meet
after
all
the
my
fact.
friends. After the fact. After the fact what? That you accepted me as your daughter.
Mr. Bullock's explanation for this reversal was straightforward. He had always doubted that Ashley was his daughter. Despite his initial acceptance, he claimed that he had been warned long ago that he might not be the father. He had simply wanted to be kind, to let her feel like she had someone. But as the truth of the situation settled in, he couldn't ignore what he believed, that she wasn't his.
No, I wanted her to be in my life. I let her come to visit me, her and her grandkids, beautiful grandkids, and I told her, I said, everything I say to her is a negative. She in my house and act like I'm not there, ignoring me.
Are you
have an
serious? You
attitude.
didn't even
Yeah.
look at me for 2 days, the first 2 days I was there.
He pointed to the timeline as evidence, stating that Ashley's birth date didn't align with when he met her mother. According to him, if she had been him, she would have been born months later, not as a full-term baby, so soon after he entered the picture. Bullock unveiled a poster board timeline, but Ashley quickly fired back.
So I met her mother in July now.
In July.
Yes, ma'am. Now I'm gonna count the months. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Ebony's supposed to have been born right here, but
In April.
yes, ma'am. Ebony was born in November, so I figured she was born in November that early. She should have been an incubator or something.
Ashley's emotions were raw as she listened to him speak. This man had once called her daughter, who had allowed her to believe she had finally found her place in the world. And now, he was fighting to erase that connection. She wasn't just questioning whether he was her father, she was questioning why he had played along for so long. The pain in her voice was undeniable, but so was her resolve.
Mr. Bullock, when you're attempting to prove your case, and you are, and I understand the confusion as I look at that timeline, if that's in fact how it happened. But what I don't understand is, it seems as if you don't understand Miss Ashley's argument. It's almost like she's just pulling at straws or she's making this up.
He claimed it was biologically impossible. His argument wasn't just based on a medical bombshell. When Bullock was in the military, a training grenade injury had destroyed one testicle, leaving him possibly sterile. But the court's medical consultant delivered crushing news. Men with one functional testicle could still father children.
Medical evidence?
Okay, Your Honor, when I was in the military, we was doing training. What we used is practice grenade, and one of them went off, and one of my testicles got destroyed. And the doctor said that it's a chance that you won't be able to bear any kids.
Do you have any other children?
No, ma'am.
Ashley had prepared for either outcome, validation or another dead end. The air grew thick with the weight of 28 years of doubt, lies, and missed birthdays. In this suspended moment, they weren't adversaries, just two people bound by biology or tragedy, waiting for science to rewrite their history. The courtroom grew silent as Judge Lake prepared to read the DNA results.
Mr. Bullock, you are not the father. Ms. Gutierrez, you are suing your mom for paternity fraud and claim she has named 4 different men to be your father. One of those men, Mr. McKinney, you have never met, and he is here today.
She had grown up with a father, a man she called Dad for years. But at 8 years old, a careless remark from a family member shattered that illusion. The man she thought was her father wasn't, and worse, no one, not even her mother, could say with certainty who her birth father was. Now, standing in a courtroom, Ms. Gutierrez was ready to uncover the truth once and for all.
What has it been like living with this notion that you don't know which of 4 people could be your father?
It's been emotional, confusing. I'm embarrassed, especially because I'm a mom myself. So it's important for everyone to know whether that person's a part of their life, you know, where they come from. And
how has this affected your relationship with your mother?
It's been distant. I've been like, I'm kind of angry at her.
Ms. Sullivan, her mother, admitted she had made mistakes in the past. She laid out the timeline for the court. There had been her ex, whom she had dated first. Then, a weekend with Mr. McKinney before he left for war. A brief but intimate visit with Mr. Bryson. Finally, Mr. Brown was the man who ultimately raised Ms. Gutierrez as his own for 5 years. It was messy, and now it was finally catching up to her.
4 possible fathers. You submitted a timeline to the court. I'd like you to explain to the court how we got to this place.
I was dating my ex, who I met him at a restaurant that I worked at, and we were dating for a while. And then I found out that Mr. McKinney was going off to war, so I went to visit him where he lived at and spend the weekend with him before he went to war. Then I went back to my ex and was still dating him.
For years, Ms. Gutierrez believed Mr. Brown was her father. She trusted him, loved him. But then, at 8 years old, a harsh truth came tumbling out. She confronted her mother, desperate for answers, only to receive another shock. But when Ms. Gutierrez reached out to him, he denied her outright. Worse, his wife didn't want him involved, and he made it clear he didn't want anything to do with her.
When did you find out Mr. Brown was not your biological father?
I was around 8 years old, and that's when the family member had said, I was there, she was watching me, and just blurted out, do I know that he's not my biological father?
Ms. Sullivan had never told her daughter the whole story. Not about the other men, not about the failed paternity test, not about how one of the supposed fathers had gone so far as to send his own brother to take a DNA test in his place. But years later, another test proved what Ms. Gutierrez feared. He wasn't her father either. Once again, she was back to square one.
Miss Sullivan, why didn't you tell your daughter about your ex? It was your ex.
I didn't tell her about him because he pretty much rejected her, or rejected the whole possibility that he was the father from day one. I had filed for a blood test when she was just a couple months, and he did everything he could to avoid the test.
That was when another name surfaced, Mr. McKinney, a man she had never met, a man who had no idea she even existed until last week. He sat in court now, staring at the daughter he might have never known about if not for this case. At first, he had dismissed the idea, but doubt began to creep in after hearing the details and seeing Ms. Gutierrez before him. Could she really be his?
So when did you find out about Mr. McKinney?
A few years back, she had told me another possibility, which was his name.
You've never met him?
No.
Not till today.
Not until today?
Yes, ma'am.
So what was your relationship, Mr. McKinney, like with her mother?
Well, I met Larissa about 29 years ago, and I went to a nightclub, and I was out on the floor dancing, and I was getting my groove on, and I felt this little hand wrap around my waist, and I turned around and looked, and there was this beautiful lady.
Mr. McKinney wasn't sure what to think. He had met Ms. Sullivan nearly 30 years ago at a nightclub. They danced, spent a weekend together. Then, he was shipped overseas. He had never looked back, never heard a word about a possible child. And now, suddenly, a young woman was standing before him. He didn't know if he was her father, but if he was, he wanted to make things right.
Do you believe you could be, or do you believe you are Ms. Gutierrez's biological father?
Initially, I thought no, but now I don't know. That's the thing. And I hope today turns out that I am.
But he wasn't the only one. There was also Mr. Bryson, another man Ms. Sullivan had been with her during that tangled, chaotic timeline. Could he be the father? Ms. Gutierrez had already gone through so much. 4 different names, 4 different possibilities, and no certainty. She had spent her life feeling like a puzzle with missing pieces, never fully knowing where she belonged.
Tell me how you found out about Mr. Bryson. How did he come into the picture? How did...
She said, I know who your father is. It's Delane. And I was like, who's Delane? Like, where did he come from? And then I asked my Mr. Brown, Perry, about it. And then he started telling me, you know, you guys have the same hands. You know, y'all have the same skin problems.
Sullivan stood stiffly, facing the judge and the consequence of a 2-week period that spawned a lifetime of confusion decades ago. Now, with 2 potential fathers present and 2 others implicated, DNA results would finally answer the question that had haunted Ms. Gutierrez since childhood. She tried to stay strong as the judge read the statement from the man she had called Dad.
My love will never change for you, Parish. I will love you unconditionally till the day that I die. Love, Dad.
She had told me when I was younger, when I would ask, you know, he could be your dad, you know, playing with me because, oh, I was pregnant, but who knows if the doctor was right.
She had been let down so many times before. So many lies, so many dead ends. She had spent years searching for something solid, something real. But what if this test only led to another rejection? What if she were still left with no father, no real answer? The courtroom was silent, heavy with anticipation. Everyone in the room knew what was coming. The answer. the final piece of the puzzle.
Mr. McKinney, you are not her father. The next result, Mr. Bryson is her father. Ms. Harris, you have been caught in a love triangle. There are 2 men in court today claiming to have fathered your 18-month-old daughter, Anaya, your current boyfriend, the plaintiff, Mr. Murray, and the defendant, your ex-boyfriend, Mr. Donaldson.
Ms. Harris found herself in a courtroom, caught in the crossfire of a paternity battle between 2 men, her current boyfriend, Mr. Murray, and her ex, Mr. Donaldson. At the center of it all was her 18-month-old daughter, Anaya. Both men claimed to be the father, and neither was backing down. But as the case continued, secrets, betrayals, and conflicting timelines threatened everything Ms. Harris thought she knew.
So, Ms. Harris, now you're currently in a relationship with Mr. Murray.
Yes.
But both Mr. Murray and Mr. Donaldson think they are your 18-month-old daughter Anaya's biological father.
Yes.
Her relationship with Mr. Donaldson had been brief, lasting only a few months. When she told him she was pregnant, he didn't believe her. In fact, he accused her of lying to sabotage his new relationship with another woman. But when she showed that she was pregnant, his commitment improved. He was present at the hospital when Anaya was born, but something changed along the way.
Well, you didn't believe she was pregnant, Mr. Donaldson?
Not at the beginning.
Why'd you feel like she was lying?
I felt like she was trying to ruin the relationship that I had.
Oh, you feel like she was trying to hang on to you by claiming that she was pregnant because you told her you were in love with somebody else.
Donaldson's mother shifted uncomfortably as the timeline was the story. Her son had only confessed the pregnancy after telling his father first. But the family's initial acceptance turned to doubt when they met Fred Murray and saw Anaya's uncanny resemblance to him. The baby they'd celebrated as their own suddenly became a question mark, the foundation of their bond cracking beneath them.
You never knew your son was possibly the father of this child?
When he told me about it, I accepted that he was because that's what Chasidi stated, that he was the dad.
At what point, Mr. Donaldson, did you say, Mom, I have something I have to tell you?
I didn't even tell her, honestly. I told my father, and my father told her.
That works too when you're scared to tell Mom.
The doubts didn't start with Mr. Donaldson. They started with his mother. One day, when she went to pick up Anaya, she noticed something unsettling. The child bore a striking resemblance to someone else.
So, at what point do you start having doubts that Anaya is your grandchild?
The thing that really changed my mind is when my mother went to pick the baby up and saw Fred.
Oh.
Mr. Murray had his own reasons for believing the baby could be his. He and Ms. Harris had been intimate during the time of conception. She insisted they had used protection, but he wasn't so sure. As he spent more time around her family, people began making comments. "The baby looks just like you," they said. At first, he brushed it off, but as the whispers grew louder, he couldn't ignore the possibility.
So, as you started going around and meeting her family, they start telling you that the baby looks just like you.
Exactly like.
So you did sleep with Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Harris, however, remained adamant. According to her, the timing didn't add up. She claimed her doctor pinpointed her conception date as early February, right in the window when she was involved with Mr. Donaldson. The encounter with Mr. Murray, she argued, happened later. She believed with absolute certainty that Mr. Donaldson was the father.
Date of conception was around February the 10th, is that correct?
Yeah.
Anaya was born on October 21st.
Yes.
Do you remember when you were intimate with Mr. Donaldson?
The emotional core emerged as Mr. Murray described stepping up when Anaya was 3 months old, changing diapers, attending appointments, and becoming daddy in every way but biological. Having moved out of state, Donaldson had become an inconsistent presence at best, yet Ms. Harris clung to her belief in Donaldson's paternity.
Who's in her life as father? Who does she bond with as father? Mr. Murray.
She looks to him like he's her father because he'd been there. He'd been there ever since she was 3 months.
And so what was it that made you
Donaldson struggled to articulate his feelings. He wanted to be the father, but had missed so much already. Mr. Murray's mother proudly displayed photos of Anaya at family gatherings. The bond undeniable regardless of blood. The resemblance was undeniable. Still, Ms. Harris remained firm. The two families sat divided by a toddler who might not biologically belong to either.
Why are you smiling like that, Mr. Donaldson?
Because that's a real, they do look alike. Like that, you can't even lie. They look alike.
But also submitted to the court was a baby picture.
Meanwhile, Mr. Murray was preparing himself for the worst. If the child weren't his, he would have to walk away from the idea of being a father to Anaya. But if the DNA test proved otherwise, it would upend everything. The tension in the courtroom was thick, and everyone was bracing for impact. Finally, it was time for the results.
It has been determined by this court. Mr. Gerald Donaldson, you are not the father. It has been determined by this court. Mr. Murray, you are not the father.
That's okay.
Susan Booker walked into court carrying 27 years of unanswered questions about her identity. Her entire life, she'd been told the man sitting beside her, Steve Booker, was her father, despite looking nothing like her two blonde, blue-eyed sisters. The truth had begun raising its head when she was 13, after noticing her striking resemblance to family friend Dennis Chasidi, a man her mother claimed she hadn't met until after Susan's birth.
Since you were a young girl, your mother had always told you the man sitting next to me, Mr. Booker, was your father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Then, when you were 13 years old, Mr. Chasidi admitted he could be your biological father.
The cracks in Susan's childhood story first appeared through cruel taunts from her sisters, who constantly told her she was adopted. As she grew older, the physical differences became undeniable. While her sisters shared Steve's fair features, Susan bore the dark hair and facial structure of Dennis Chasidi. Her mother's explanations about nature versus nurture didn't make sense as the similarities became impossible to ignore.
I first started noticing at a very young age. I have two older sisters, and they're both very skinny with blonde hair and blue eyes. I look absolutely nothing like them.
Susan's voice shook as she described confronting both men at age 13. First, Dennis admitted there was a possibility he could be her father, despite her mother's assurances otherwise. Then Steve dropped the bombshell that he and Dennis had known each other before Susan's birth, contradicting her mother's claim they'd only met afterward. Steve's hotel dinner story felt like a transparent lie to the teenager.
And I said, Dad, look at me in my eyes and tell me that there's no absolute chance. And he said, there might be a small one, but she has reassured him. And I said, how is there a chance if you guys have never met before I was born? And he said, we did meet.
The family's tangled history spilled out in court. Susan's mother had been in an open marriage with Steve when she became pregnant, simultaneously involved with Dennis through a swingers club arrangement meant to save the marriage. What began as Steve's attempt to spice up their relationship backfired spectacularly when his wife found her soulmate in Dennis, leaving Susan's paternity in question.
Your Honor, I didn't realize we were having challenges in our relationship. I mean, to me, everything was fine.
How could you not realize we were having challenges in our relationship? You cheated on me.
I didn't cheat on you.
Yes, you did.
The emotional toll became clear as Susan recounted years of begging her mother for honesty. Every time she asked point blank about her paternity, she received evasive answers or outright lies. What hurt most wasn't the potential that Steve wasn't her biological father, but that the people she trusted most had conspired to keep the truth from her for nearly 3 decades.
Upset with her, of course, because you believe she lied and said she never slept with Mr. Chasidi until after you were born.
Yes, Your Honor.
But what other evidence did you have that would suggest that she's lying about?
Susan's mother offered tearful justifications. She'd feared Dennis would leave if she told him about the pregnancy and didn't want Susan to feel out of place in their blended family. But her shifting stories undermined her credibility. First claiming she'd never met Dennis before Susan's birth, then admitting to a platonic dinner, before finally acknowledging their sexual relationship.
What was your reason for not being honest with her?
In what way, Your Honor? I don't understand the question.
In a major way. Not telling her that there's a possibility that someone else could be her biological father.
Oh.
Steve's heartfelt testimony cut through the drama. Regardless of biology, Susan would always be his daughter. He recalled her birth, insisting she'd initially look just like his other children. His unconditional love contrasted sharply with Susan's ultimatum. If the test proved her parents had lied, she might never speak to them again.
Had a good life. That's what we were trying to give you, was a good life.
So all you had to do was tell the truth on the 1,000 chances I gave you. That's all I asked.
We tried to give you the best life possible.
I had a great childhood, Mom.
The courtroom tensed as Susan's sister Diane appeared via video, adamant that Steve was their biological father. Her emotional statement revealed how deeply the family's web of lies had taken root. Diane saw any other outcome as a betrayal of her entire upbringing. The sisters' bond now hung in the balance, threatened by DNA results that could rewrite their relationship.
I believe my sister's biological father is Steve, my biological father, because he told me for all these years, and I've been the only person to stick up for my mother. And if the results come back that Steve is not her biological father,
With decades of uncertainty finally coming to a head, all eyes turned to the judge. The tension in the courtroom was nearly unbearable as the DNA results sat in a sealed envelope, waiting to be opened. Miss Booker had spent years preparing herself for this moment. Would the test confirm what she had always believed, or would it upend everything once again?
It has been determined by this court that Ms. Booker's biological father is Mr. Booker.
I'm sorry.